This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of That's My Jam.
Apparently.
Mike just reminded us because we were like, what's That's My Jam? Why is that in the show notes? That's what we said we would call it when we watch episodes of Kitchen Cabinet and review them for your listening displeasure.
Side note, I think you'll enjoy this. The other night during a Greens branch meeting, I was plugging something like, if you want to find out more information, I said, I'll put it in the show notes. And what I meant to say was I'll put it in the chat, like the branch meeting online chat. Put it in the show notes.
That's
and everyone
so
laughed
cute.
at me.
When you've been podcasting. You've got podcast brain. That's so cute.
Yes, look, this is called That's My Jam for this particular Patreon bonus episode. Thank you so much for supporting the show. We love you very much. We love you. We love you. This is an unofficial Greens Party podcast, neither Serious Danger nor That's My Jam. It's made possible with the help of the Great Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin, who is on top of everything that we do, which we very much appreciate.
Seems to remember the episodes, probably because he's the one who, like, we just spew out the shit and then he's the one who spends the hours making it sound okay.
When we get into the gold, spinning it. He's the alchemist, spinning it into gold that you enjoy. We are diving back into the world of Annabelle Crabb's kitchen cabinet so that we can laugh, learn, and eat with the political class. Delicious jams and desserts. Yum, 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 yum.
Yeah. After our, strident and very academic critique of Kitchen Cabinet as a concept, we've decided because it's so bad, we're going to watch more of it and talk about it.
I think we acknowledge in our critique that, like, this is bad for the country, but we are political fucking nerd weebs and it's exactly up our alley.
It's for you, listener. Don't pretend it's not.
That was episode 33 of the Patreon episode 33, Bridget McKenzie and Peter Dutton episodes we looked at and, yes, had a big discussion about the existence of this show. For this episode, we are looking at 2 eps from season 5. We're going all the way back to 2015, just weeks, I believe. I think a lot of this was shot just weeks after Tony Abbott had been rolled and replaced by one Malcolm Turnbull. That
would make sense. That would make sense for some things maybe that came up during the episode that I watched. You've watched both episodes. I haven't watched the one that you've watched, which is you watched the one with Anthony Albanese and Christopher Pine.
Yes. Pine.
Whereas I only watched Richard Di Natale because I only support Greens MPs.
Oh, I see. I see how it is.
That's why.
Well, I love bipartisanship, so that's why I watch mine. Oh, yeah, fair enough.
Reaching across the aisle.
We'll get to it, but trust me, you are not missing much. I don't know. I thought these were both generally pretty boring. That's my review right at the top, but we could dissect them a little bit, but yes.
Are you saying that there were 2 in the one episode because there was that little content?
Yes, Christopher Pine did the first ever episode of Kitchen Cabinet with Amanda Vanstone, so there were 2 then for some reason. And now Pine is back in season 5. We know that Annabelle Crabb and Christopher Pine, they might have literally been at uni at the same time, or at least both from Adelaide, so I think pretty close. And you'll be delighted to know that episode really delves into the concept of bipartisanship. And isn't it great that Anthony Albanese and Christopher Pine can get along?
Oh, no, it's really bad. It's really bad. That's why we're fucked. Okay, well, I'm sure we can talk about that. Should we get into the RDN episode first, Richard Di Natale?
Let's do it, baby.
Let's do it. Let's do it, Richard Di Natale. The former Greens a lead. He's Italian.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, so in the Maya segment,
we're going to do the whole chat. You go to the whole chat like that.
Why not? Why not? No, okay, that's enough. That's it. In season 5.
There's been a chat about wogs and skips, so why not? Get into it.
Skips. What's a skip?
Whiteys. The non-wogs.
Okay. All right. Non-wogs. Wogs are non-wogs. Yeah. All right. So it's season 5. I didn't realize the time. I had to check because I was like, how long ago is this? Because it feels at the start, it feels very long ago. It's only the first Greens MP that's come on since Christine Milne, who came on back in season 2 when she was leader of the Greens, I assume. Right. And they go out to visit Richard Di Natale's farm. And in the introduction, Annabelle Crabb is like, we're going to visit little-known Senator Richard Di Natale. She says, she really owned him. She was like,
when the news broke that Christine Milne was retiring as leader of the Greens to be replaced by Senator Richard Di Natale, the overwhelming national response was, Richard who? A very good reason to pay this little-known senator a visit.
When we found out that Christine Milne was retiring and being replaced by Richard Di Natale, the general consensus was, Richard who?
Okay, this annoyed me so much. All right, no one said that. All right, the Australian public weren't following that at all. And I'm sorry,
Maybe
every
that's
election,
even worse.
They go down the main street, they show people photos of the fucking Prime Minister, and people can't name who the fuck the Prime Minister is. So
I suppose so.
People don't know anything about anyone.
But I mean, she's probably right that it was maybe one of the lesser known MPs that they did on the show at the time, because the Greens were so small as well, and he was new.
But also senators, like little-known senator.
Yeah.
I reckon the most famous senator would be either Penny Wong or Pauline Hanson at this point, like in terms of like just like people aware of the fact that because, you know, senators are less, you know, they're less likely to have ministries and stuff, or they're just the way the House operates, yada, yada, yada. They're just much less out there, I would say. Unless you are a political nerd, although to be fair, political nerds are watching Kitchen Cabinet, so it all makes sense.
Yeah, maybe like lesser known. So she goes out to visit Richard Di Natale on his farm. Now I went to look up like this farm to see if, I don't know, there's any more information about it and whatever, how long he's owned it and whether he actually lived there and everything. Because, you know, there was a whole thing where she went to Peter Dutton's farm, but that's not where he actually lives, and it was all framing, blah, blah, blah. It seems like this was actually his farm where he lived, I think. But there was this story from 2016, so it would have been shortly after this, about a media attack regarding not just the farm, and apparently he'd failed to declare it, although he apparently actually had declared it. I don't really understand what happened there. But the headline in The Age was, Greens leader Richard Di Natale fails to declare home, pays au pairs low wage. Do you remember this at all? I'd never heard of this.
I remember him being caught up in the au pairs, and of course, I don't know, I reckon if he'd done that photo shoot with the turtleneck, that would have come up in the Kitchen Cabinet, so maybe that was still yet to come. But there was certainly a period where it was like turtleneck shot, farm, au pairs, those were all swirling around Mr. Di Natale and his leadership, yes.
Right. So he has somehow spoken about or declared maybe something about these au pairs who were apparently paid $150 in cash a week plus $300 in food and board. So apparently the total was, $487. Now, he says that he actually must have lodged a complaint about the article in The Age, because there's this press council ruling that found that, they did some bad reporting because they implied effectively that he was paying them, like $1 something an hour based on a 40-hour week, when he had proactively, like explicitly said they work a 25-hour week. But even so, is it like $487, including just food and board allowances for 25 hours? My maths aren't great, but that's not very good.
Well, yeah, it's because it's more than half the. Okay, God, my maths is terrible too. Let me go this. You carry on. Keep talking to the listener. I'll figure this out.
I don't know. I mean, it just sounds kind of sus to me. And I guess, I mean, the reason that they would have
$20 an hour.
$20 an hour. Yep. So I guess maybe that's like minimum wage-ish.
Well, minimum wage is substantially higher now, but yes, this is almost a decade ago.
Back in the day.
And I mean, there is something. I mean, there are certain. I mean, again, it's not endorsing this, but there is some level of greater exploitation of people on certain. Oh, but I guess we don't know if they were. Why are you assuming that they're?
Doesn't an au pair have to be? Yeah. Isn't that what an au pair is?
Does an au pair have to be from another country?
Well, I don't know. I guess that's kind of what I thought, that it was like something of it. But no, of course they don't.
That's a disgrace. We need fucking Aussie au pairs, mate. We need homegrown, true blue, dinky au pairs.
Surely the main thing is, like, we wouldn't want our Greens leader these days to have au pairs at all, because it's a rich people, it's a weird thing. Like, having an au pair, that's not a relatable thing. And
you're absolutely right. An au pair is a helper from a foreign country working for and living part of a host family. Okay,
right. I was right. Look at me. Yes, I'm very knowledgeable and very worldly. I have travelled. I spent a semester in Vancouver, actually. So anyway, right. So we're on the farm. It's Richard Di Natale. It's 2015. He was about to have this scandal about the au pairs, but he's just innocent new leader of the Greens at this point.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like? Have you met Richard? What are your thoughts on him generally? Do you think he was a good leader?
I met Richard. He very kindly gave me some time when he was leader. It must have been during the 2016 election, I want to say,
right.
For my podcast. I went to his office on Collins Street, and he, I threw him a few questions about Lee Rhiannon and socialism. This is at that point he'd done his whole rejection of left renewal kind of thing. I probably wasn't as sort of socialisty as I am now, and so I was maybe a little bit more centrist, feeling his vibe kind of thing. I think Richard Di Natale is a thoroughly decent man. I think that I think we've discussed before on the show that this idea of him mainstreaming and making the argument that the Greens actually represent mainstream opinions of lots of Australians was an interesting move that I think you and I have both talked about, that played a role in you becoming aware of the Greens as a party and sort of listen to their message a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think certainly when it comes to class politics, probably there are lots of things that you and I would diverge opinion on with him with. Yes. And he's certainly much closer to the Bob Brown tradition of the Greens and the history of Bob Brown than perhaps your ratbag adamant Lee Rhiannon vibe.
Yeah. Well, he says, in the tradition of kitchen cabinet spending approximately 10% of the time talking about anything political and the other 90% just like, oh, lovely mangoes you have here. But like at the main
Did your pair make this pizza? This is delightful.
Honestly. The framing is, and this was the other thing that made it feel very like fucking almost 10 years ago, which is insane that that's almost 10 years ago now. But the framing from Annabelle Crabb is like, the Greens are an environmentalist party. You can't, you have to, yes, environmentalism is good, but you can't get in the way of good jobs and the economy, and that's important. And he does use a lot of the language that people might even still use today, like that the Greens use today. And I think it's true, like he was one of the first people that, yes, began quote unquote mainstreaming the Greens and broadening the focus beyond just environmentalism. He says things like, I think we're given this false choice between the environment and economic growth. I swear I reckon that conversation went further, but the editing seems to have cut it because it's kind of, there's this weird edit there, which I thought was interesting. And he says, there's this stereotype. She goes, what stereotype is that? And he's like, oh, well, the tree hugger kind of thing. But when you actually talk to us, when you talk to people and explain what we're actually about, what our policies are, they're on board. Like the biggest obstacle is they don't actually know what we stand for. And not all mining is necessarily bad. Some mining is essential for the green transition. And in particular, the shift, as Annabelle Crabb puts it, she's like from, the kind of Democrats keeping the bastards honest to replacing the bastards. So becoming more a genuine contender for government in a way. Yes. And I think that is like, that does kind of capture what I would say Di Natale did as a leader of the Greens, right?
Yeah. I think in the same way that Bob Brown in many ways was able to take more radical positions, not truly radical as you and I would understand it now, but a certainly more radical approach and doing radical things like getting arrested and putting his body on the line because he presented himself as a middle to upper class doctor, relatively wealthy, yes, evidence-based approach, not, a pretty didn't do a lot of yelling and shouting. Bob Brown really, spoke in like quite this bizarre monotone really for someone with his level of politics. That presentation of these much more radical ideas in a slightly more, mainstream, presentable, boring way. There's the moment during this episode when Annabelle Crabb asked about Richard Di Natale's ear piercing. So it says, oh, you don't have your ear pierced anymore. And he's like, oh, yes, perceptions, and some people might be turned off by a
Well, he said his staff told him he had to take it out. He actually admits that.
That's crazy.
Isn't that interesting? That's really fascinating to me. It reminds me, I don't know if we spoke about this anytime we've spoken to Jono Sriranganathan, but how, like, when he first ran for council, someone advised him to wear a suit for his candidate photos. And so he's got, you can't even imagine him in a suit now, right? But he's like clean shaven and in a suit in his early kind of candidate photos and on call flutes. And it just looks so wrong. And now, of course, he just wears what he would normally wear. But that kind of, that branding, like that there would have been people going, no, we really need to mainstream you to stop you looking like a crazy hippie, is quite funny.
Yeah.
And yet, like his home is still like it is still presented so much as like it's very Greens. That's what I think is interesting. Like the whole thing about kitchen cabinet, right? Is it's like there's the person behind the politician and maybe they're just like us and it's like humanizing them. But then at the same time, everything that is shown is kind of within it, it is branding. Like it's all the branding of the politician and whatever party they represent. And so of course, like he lives on a solar powered farm and he takes her to his shed where he's got like all his batteries and he's got this inverter charger and it's actually kind of cute because you can see how excited he gets, right? Like explaining it to her. But it's so green. So yeah, it's all very green. It's also giving Nora Smith. You know who Nora Smith is?
No.
Is that her name? I think it's this influencer that's like very of the moment and everyone, loves her, hates her, wants to do an opinion piece about her, but she is a Mormon and a wife of this other influencer. And she does her thing on TikTok is like doing everything from scratch. So she's like, my little children wanted crayons. And so I decided to get started on making them some and like melts down the wax and like rolls out paper and everything. And it's just like, it's to the point of ridiculous. But I was like, honestly, Richard Di Natale in this episode is the Nora Smith of Kitchen Cabinet. And for the few people who listen to this show and are also into TikTok influencers, they'll think that's really funny and smart that I said that.
I assume the take on Nora Smith is like, oh, this is all very well and good if you have the time and resources to do
and
that.
And it's like it's almost to the point of unnecessary, right?
Just buy some crayons, bitch.
Yeah. He's made the wine. He's made the dough from scratch. I mean, that's not that ridiculous, but he's made the dough from scratch. He's been home making salami. He's stringing up salami. He's growing olives.
From the pigs. Like he named the pigs and then he's eating the pigs.
And then he's eating the pigs. He's like, at one point they're just walking through, like they're sort of just as an aside looking at olive trees. And he's like, the plan is to make olive oil.
I know. I mean, yeah. I feel like this would be a good profile if he was retired, but when he actually is a politician, I was like, come on, Richard, focus on the planet being on fire. But anyway, but I'd like to know, like watching him lay out the solar batteries, like so the whole house is off the grid. He has these batteries that store them. Again, I don't know how much all of this costs. I assume it costs like quite like a substantial amounts of money.
Gotta be.
But I think it is important to note, like, I think we always get this, particularly environmental activists or people outspoken on the environment. It's always this classic individual responsibility thing. It's like, oh, well, you're a hypocrite because you're calling for this renewable energy, but you're using fossil fuels to power your lifestyle. And you go, well, no, look, here is my house that is completely off the grid, that is powered by solar. Yeah, he kind of has to. Yes, but then immediately the charge is, well, you can only do that because you're rich. And you go, well, you never fucking win, right? Like Greta Thunberg's a hypocrite for taking flights, then she takes a boat, and then she's a weirdo who sails on a boat, So I just think it's important to know. I mean, these are really good things that people are doing greener approaches to life, and we should all be able to get off the grid. And the dream would be to make batteries for solar power and renewable energy so that everybody can live off the grid. That would be fantastic. And that is sort of the world that Richard is fighting for and the Greens should be fighting for. But of course, you just never get the credit for actually doing it, I would argue.
Yeah. But he is like yes, you're right. He doesn't really have, a class politics. Like I think it was almost like he added the social justice element to the Greens and then when it shifted into the Adam Bandt era is when it started actually taking on an economic justice element because, he spoke about not just environmentalism but other issues and sort of, mainstreamed the Greens, but it didn't have a class element.
Yeah. I mean, he mentions refugees as well, being nice to refugees, and I think that's also something that has my respect for Richard is that he was always very passionate and outspoken on that particular issue, which is great. Yes. It's interesting, the difference between social justice and economic justice, really. I'm sure lots of people assumed that economic issues were under the banner of social justice, but it's actually much more explicit to sort of say, no, economic justice, class politics, there are classes and there is a ruling class and they're the enemy and we need to work against them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it's an ideological question, right? As to whether you think you can achieve social justice primarily through a class analysis and a class-based approach, or whether you think that you can do it through a more smaller liberal approach, I guess, in a way. Do you have I was thinking about this, like, do you have a ranking of favorite Greens leaders?
I don't have a chart or at home or anything like that, but no, Adam
Doesn't
Band
wanna
is
put
certainly the
anyone
leader
offside.
who's closest to my politics, and he's the leader, I would say, who I get most excited about, and is certainly the most consistent Greens MP that makes me excited about the politics. Well, apart from
The
some
most
recent
consistent
additions.
Greens MP that makes you excited about politics.
I just mean over a period of time, over a long period of time, I suppose. He's been around for a long period of time, and he's had my respect for a long period of time.
Yeah.
That's not to say that other people couldn't move into that number one spot. You know, they just got to keep trying. And
any Greens MPs listening out there, you know, work a little bit harder, stick around a little bit longer, and Tom might just say that you're his favourite.
What about you then?
My ranking?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Adam's my favourite. And I think, but this is the thing, I think I have a slightly unfavourable, like a less charitable view of Richard Di Natale than I should have. And I think that's because the last thing I remember about Di Natale, if I'm like, when is the last time I saw this guy? It was when he just came back, decided to insert himself in the fucking debate on the election of Greens leader.
Yes.
That's what and like, how fucking sad that I almost forget then, like his legacy of everything else that he did achieve as Greens leader, and a lot of things that I probably like and admire and respect and am grateful for. But all I remember is that we were having an internal debate about whether to make the election of leader a democratic process instead of something that happens behind closed doors. And him and who else was it? Was like him, Christine Milne, Nick McKim. Fuck, yeah, which sucks. I hate being reminded of that. Nick, like McKim, is meant to be good. And they did this stupid fucking open letter that got published in The Guardian that was like, here's why members shouldn't have a say, and actually it should just still be us. And I'm like, how? That really left a sour taste in my mouth. And I'm also like, how embarrassing. And you have no shame to, as a person who rose to power as the Greens leader, on the basis of a back room, you know, whatever, just the party room, 9 people deciding behind closed doors that you be the leader, to then defend that publicly. I'm like, wow, are you not embarrassed? Are you not ashamed of yourself?
Pretty bad. I was going to say it doesn't really matter about our ranking of the Greens leaders because we don't get a say in who the fuck they are.
We don't get a say. If anyone's like just a quick note, we did a deep dive on this issue, the election of leader, in episode 57. If folks really want to listen to that. But what were you going to say, Tom?
Well, just one brief thing. In Richard's defense, I think that since leaving politics, his sort of focus has been much more Victoria-based, and I think he's been pretty great on campaigning and advocating for safe injecting rooms, which is a very hot button issue in Melbourne.
Has he?
Yeah, and I think, again, Richard's stance and his experience as a doctor on the drugs issue and, you know, a harm reduction approach has been pretty cool. So I think we can endorse that. True. That's good. But I mean, that is an interesting moment in this episode, right? When Annabelle Crabb tries to get us onto this idea of like, oh, you quickly, you know, one day the leader was Christine Milne and the next day it came out it was you. It wasn't very democratic. You didn't get the members involved there. What's the deal with that, mate?
Yeah, and he like takes a little mouthful of food. Like, I think that's I actually think this is a thing that she often does. Like, they seem to do, or maybe it's the editing or whatever. But like, she brings up the awkward questions and then just like takes a little mouthful, and he takes a mouthful, and then she's like, "It was a bit sneaky, wasn't it?" Takes another mouthful. Like,
you sneaky Italian motherfucker.
Yeah.
And look, he gives the same answer that we heard both during that debate within the party. What year was that? Was it 2020? The actual party
I think it was 2020.
Yes.
I think so.
When we met. Oh. The same thing you heard from Nick McKim, right? The people in the parliament, in the parliamentary power, need to have confidence and work with the leader. They need to have trust in the leader, which of course implies that if the membership of all the Greens select someone as the leader, the people in the parliament might not necessarily trust that person to do a good job, which makes absolutely no sense, particularly after it would occur.
Slightly concerning.
Yes, it would occur. It would occur after a process in which it was an open, anyone could run, and we'd have a democratic process, and we'd debate, and you'd campaign, and you'd try and explain why you think you're the best person for the leader, and the membership would make a decision, and you'd have to accept that decision. And if you didn't like that decision, fucking tough. Move on, you're an adult, and you should respect the will of the membership of the party that you're a member of, mate.
Yeah. I mean, it's that whole thing as well where he's like, well, it's just about the people who have to work with them in parliament, which is so like Parliament brained. It's
Yes.
so, I think, again, it's like an old Greens thing where it really privileges the work in Parliament as opposed to work in the community or in movement building. And the other thing is he's like, oh, well, when she says you didn't include your membership in who becomes the leader, he's like, well, we didn't have the soap opera like the other parties to, feed the news cycles. As if, that idea that it's like democracy is a soap opera. Like, what if we were like, oh, we won't have elections because it's just a soap opera?
Yeah, well, he's crazy because the soap opera happened before the Labor Party had more involvement with their membership, right? Like the soap opera was the parliamentary party eating itself and stabbing each other in the back. Yeah. And
it's the
Labor membership had nothing to do with it. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. It's that process where you don't have membership control encourages like factionalism, backroom deals, scandalous fucking, wrangling of votes to secure a position as leader, as opposed to an open democratic process, which is something that we should endorse and support as the Greens when one of our 4 pillars is participatory grassroots democracy. But yeah, where people put it all out there and let people know what they stand for and we're able to have that discussion openly, like that's not just media fodder. That's democracy.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, it still pisses me off what happened there. And I really hope that one day we get fucking democratic election of the leader. It's just embarrassing.
It is pretty sad that, yes, this is from almost a decade ago and we still haven't sorted it out.
The same situation.
I thought the discussion of consensus decision making was pretty interesting as well. Sort of asked like how that works, and Richard explains that's how, that you talk about things for a long time and people share their views and all that kind of thing. I mean, of course, after this later we would see the collapse of, or certainly the Lee Rhiannon episode in which she said that she was sticking to policy and she was basically sidelined by the parliamentary party. And they got all very messy. Wasn't very consensual, it seemed. But I guess that hadn't happened yet. So that's something.
I mean, doesn't she say, Annabelle Crabb says in the thing that Scott Ludlam described consensus decision making as talking and talking until you want to bang your head against a brick wall or something, which is also what state council can feel like. But
I assume that was Scott Ludlam just being honest about it, but not necessarily saying that it's bad or that we should do without it. It's just the reality of what it is. Yeah.
No, I think that's I think that anyone who's done consensus decision making very openly acknowledges that it's painful, but it's the best. Yes. It's the best system,
What else? It looked like they had lovely pizzas. There's a nice little pizza oven there. I enjoyed eating that. But the bruschetta looked very nice.
Bruschetta.
We had some nice wine and a lovely little dessert there with rhubarb.
Well, yes, and of course, because, and again, I'm like, this is so 2015 that she says at the start, she's made a dessert that uses sourdough breadcrumbs because then the crumbs won't go to waste. And she says, I'm recycling, bound to be a winner with the Greens.
Which is even by 2015, aren't we all on board recycling at this point? Like,
I know. Is that a Greens thing, really? God damn.
Oh, you got 2 bins, you fucking green hippie dumb cunt. We're all recycling, mate.
But yeah, look, I mean, it was an interesting snapshot in time. It reminded me of Richard Di Natale. No idea what he is doing now. Good to hear that he's advocating for safe injecting rooms. That makes me happy because otherwise, I feel like we just don't hear from him. And actually, maybe that's good because you shouldn't hear from former political leaders. So thanks, Richard, for keeping your mouth shut.
I should be still a member. Look, I would happily have Richard on the show sometime to chat about various things. I think he would be great about that.
I'm not saying I wouldn't be happy to have him on the show.
Yeah.
Maybe I could meet him again. I wonder if actually I think there's a very funny photo. Well, it's very funny to me just because I'm like, wow, what another life. There's a photo of me meeting him at an iftar dinner when I was a candidate in 2019.
All right.
So I guess, almost exactly 5 years ago. I wonder if I can find it, I'll post it on the Instagram.
All right. Well, I watched another episode from this same season. Anthony Albanese and Christopher Pine, the original odd couple, getting to I fixed it.
Wait. Are they together? As in, it's not like half and half. They're together?
They're hanging out together. They're making dumplings together.
House?
Well, we are not at a house. We are at a Chinese restaurant in Canberra. I mean, it's sort of like, I guess, the producers and Annabelle have a vision for the episode, but also there's probably a whole bunch of practical implications that also determine who does the episode and yes, and the fact they're doing it together. Again, Christopher Pine's already been on the show. I haven't watched the episode he did with Amanda Vanstone, but he's back and he's hanging out with Anthony Albanese. But also it seems that Anthony Albanese and Christopher Pine, perhaps they're both the leaders of the House, actually. That might actually be the angle. Perhaps they're both currently leaders of that, or at least Anthony Albanese was the leader of the House in the Gillard minority government, and Christopher Pine is now the leader of the House in 2015. I think that.
Okay. Okay.
What do you think about Christopher Pine? He has a funny voice. He says his name funny. What's your general vibe on him? Obviously we hate his politics and he does done terrible things. Are you charmed at all by his wacky turn of phrase, his campness, his ability to occasionally take the piss out of himself? Does that do anything for you?
No, I actually can't think of moments where I've been like, oh, Christopher Pine, he's not that bad. What's a funny turn of phrase or joke that he's made?
Well, a funny thing, like, he's become since leaving politics, a bit of a ABC darling, I would say, or a liberal media darling in the Age and the SMH. There's a pretty famous quote of him doing some kind of panel talking about the day when he found out that Tony Abbott had given Prince Philip a knighthood, and he said, "Oh fuck, today's going to be a terrible day." In his final speech to Parliament, he talked about having a nice G&T. He's sort of.
How is that funny? If any normal person said that, it wouldn't be funny. It's just because he's got a stupid voice.
He displays a level of self-awareness about his privilege, his accent, his general demeanor that some people would find charming in a way. That is a conservative who would be more
Doesn't take much for some people, does it? I know.
Got very low bar. I agree, and I think I probably used to find it somewhat charming because, again, as a comedian, you sort of just be like, oh, at least that's a politician who has some level of character, that you can latch onto. But over the years, I'm much more like, wow, it's amazing how much this guy who is terrible is able to distract from his terribleness and almost turn it upon itself as a charming attribute by just referencing the fact that he's a conservative piece of shit. And since leaving Parliament, he's like, his involvement in the defense industry. I mean, like his alignment with massive weapons manufacturers and companies that definitely lead to the deaths of innocent people. It is almost certainly he's some way connected to the current genocide being played out in Gaza. But he says pan funny and he drinks G&Ts. Isn't that funny?
Lovely. Delightful.
Well, you love it because, this episode is sort of geared, I guess. They're using the fact that they've got Albo and Pine together to say something about bipartisanship. Annabelle starts by saying, Australian politics has been really nasty for a few years now, but today Kitchen Cabinet is calling a truce. It's a bipartisan episode, and they're making dumplings together in the kitchen of a Chinese restaurant in Canberra.
Cool. Wow, you solved it, Annabelle. Thank you so much.
Weirdly,
that's so good.
We still have political conflict even after this episode went to air. It's very strange.
But you know what? I mean, they did start to agree on a lot more things after this. So maybe she was successful. Who knows? Maybe it was that chat that started it all. And they were like, you know what? New coal and gas? Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's not raise New Start.
I mean, that's it. The image of these three people, a Labor politician, future Prime Minister, Christopher Pine, and Annabelle Crabb, a member of the media class, all making dumplings and laughing with each other about, about bipartisanship's all right, and how are you guys friends? You're on opposite sides of the chamber. Maybe everything is like completely political theatre, but it seems like, out of the chamber, you guys actually have heaps in common and you're actually sort of fine getting along with each other. It was pretty gross, I must say.
Yeah.
Also, hey, no judgment. I'm a chubby man myself, but this is Elbow pre-weight loss, and I must say he was a bigger dude. Just noticed that.
You forget that, don't you?
Lay off the dumplings, mate.
Sure.
Christopher Pine starts talking about who he lives in the share house with. His share house in Canberra is like him, Simon Birmingham, Maurice Payne. You know how they all kind of live together when they're...
Oh, like for when they're in Parliament.
When they're in Parliament, yep. That was briefly not even that interesting, to be honest. I love how
Sounds
they all
horrific,
try to
though.
be funny. This really drives me crazy as well.
Yeah.
Particularly at the start of the episode, everyone's so nervous, clearly, and they're just trying to be like, really like,
Yeah.
hi, Annabelle, great to see you. This is fantastic. They try to throw a few jokes around, like Albo's trying to claim they get the actual chef who works at the restaurant to make the dumplings, and obviously they're good dumplings and they're shit at making dumplings. And so Albanese's like, oh, I'll just try and these are all mine over here. And then Pine says something like, just saying, hashtag just saying. He just repeatedly says hashtag just saying to try to be cool
Oh
with the
my
kids.
God. Wow.
I think you should
I'm
have
glad
actually
that I
watched
didn't
this
watch. I'm
afterwards.
glad I did the Richard Di Natale one. This is fucked.
Then we sort of started getting into the conflict. So obviously, Annabelle Crabb's trying to tease out the things that they have, the differences they have and the things they have in common. Christopher Pine says he remembers Albanese's first speech about John Howard and saying a lot of scathing things about Howard's legacy. I assume this is it just after Albanese gets elected in 1996, after they've just lost government. And also Annabelle knows that in that first term, in that but before that, I think Christopher Pine, who must have been elected earlier, told John Howard to not run for the leadership again because he's yesterday's man, before he would then become prime ministership and stay in power for 11 and a half years. So they both have these kind of little critiques of Howard. And Annabelle Crabbs asks Albo, like, do you regret that speech about Howard, like saying all those kind of intense things? And I do. It must have been his maiden speech maybe, or there is just a speech from Albanese where he goes very hard on the Howard legacy and how shit they are back when Albanese was kind of good, ?
Yeah.
And he says that, no, I don't regret that speech. I had a job to do. We just lost government. We weren't going to cower in the corner. Basically, they've got back into power, so they're not going to be weak. They still believe in something, goddammit, and they're still going to stick it to crusty old Howard.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
I mean, it's, and there's that interview now of the guy from Channel 7 showing Albanese the clip of him in Parliament. It must have been his maiden speech talking about, taxing the rich and stuff. And then what would that guy think of the Prime Minister Albanese, who's just like passing these massive tax cuts? And I don't know. Do you think he does actually feel any kind of regret for how much he's changed? Or he's like, that's just politics. This is what I'm doing. Or should we care anyway?
Well, surely no, he thinks that he's right, doesn't he? Like, he would have to convince himself that he's making pragmatic and sensible decisions and he's doing the right thing, right? Like, how else could he do it?
Yeah, true. But that's so crazy because he was the younger guy, right? So he was young
but he's
Albanese.
Like, oh, silly, stupid young me.
But that's crazy because you have that politics thinking, and you enter politics with the ambition and the desire to form government, to wield power, to do the stuff that you're passionate about. So then when you get to that seat of power and you're there and you're seriously just saying, no, we're not going to do any of that stuff. The main thing is us maintaining government. That's more important than anything else. And I'll sell the rest of my principles down the river.
Yeah.
Bad, I reckon. Anyway, lots of dumpling makings. I must say, this is like the worst of both worlds because they're shit at making dumplings and they're boring people. Like, I'll happily watch a boring person do amazing cooking.
But it's like a good cooking show.
Yeah, totally. No worries.
Yeah.
But this is just boring people being shit at cooking that doesn't look very good. So it's...
Yeah, I mean, I learned from the Richard Di Natale episode something about not rolling the dough out because it gets rid of the air. So I feel like I was learning about cooking.
You were learning. Oh, as in you want the air in the dough.
Yes, you want the air.
Interesting.
Yeah. Fluffy.
Well, none of that. You're just watching two men who have no idea how to roll dumplings fuck up a Chinese man's kitchen and eventually they just shepherd it out and be like, just go eat this food, please, and talk about your wonderful bipartisan friendship, and then we can all move on. So they sit down and Annabelle Crabb asks them whether they've ever gotten in trouble for hanging out together. This idea that I guess Albo and Pine were also doing the morning shows together, or they didn't do a Sky News show, is it? That's Miles, and that was Pine and Miles, right? Richard Miles and Christopher Pine did that show on Sky News. Do you remember that?
I don't know. Yeah. I was young.
Yeah. But yes, I think Albanese and Pine would often go head to head on like Sunrise or what have you. So they're often seen together there.
So they had a little rivalry, friendship kind of thing going.
Yes, and I guess
cute.
But also they had a professional relationship in Parliament because Albanese was leader of the House and Pine was leader of the opposition business or whatever. Annabelle Crabb lays out this theory that politics has become more nasty and mean recently, and she sort of lays that at the feet of the hung parliament. That is, in these turbulent times from 2010 onwards, because one vote could basically, bring down a government. It was all sort of a line ball kind of thing. That's what's made politics more nasty and more recently. What do you make of that theory?
I mean, first of all, I just don't subscribe to any kind of fucking discourse about civility politics, whether politics is more nasty or not. I think it's always a stupid conversation.
Yeah.
But wouldn't people who think that way also be like, aren't they the ones that think that you just need minor parties because they mix things up a little bit and they break up the kind of the duopoly? What do you call that? What do you call that when there's just two of them?
Duopoly.
Yeah. There's something else though that I'm sorry, I can't think of the word of. Please write in and tell me. But that it's when it's just two parties just going against each other. Like that, that you want a hung parliament because it forces them to kind of negotiate and get outside of their major party box and think like I would think that people who care about civility politics would be more into a hung parliament. But I mean, I understand the argument, but I don't agree with it.
Well, this is the thing. It's sort of there's got to be something to it. I agree with you that I don't think people's contempt for anger for the political class. Well, no, maybe that has changed over time as the political class and the political system has been less and less able to address material concerns or to seriously change anything. And I think that is a direct result of sort of the neoliberal turn. Our hatred for the political class generally has intensified, right? Or at least, people's. And though we've seen a trend in anti-political sentiment since the 60s or whatever, that's been a steady trend. But you could say that in the 21st century, that's got particularly worse. Plus, not that I'm saying it's all the phone's fault or it's all because of Twitter, but I guess the presence of social media would have an impact on our perception of the toxicity of political debate because you are seeing that political debate far more frequently in a far more personal fashion across the board, right? Like that would have to make a difference to our perception as to how nasty, quote unquote, politics is.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't think she is talking about how nasty or personal politics is. I think she's just talking about politics. I think she's going, we're having to see all these intense debates play out because there's actually a genuine debate to be had because that's what hung parliaments force, right? Like if you look at, when there's a party or an independent or whatever in the balance of power at the moment, it forces a more open and kind of granular and public and intense debate on a particular issue and the politics of it. That's not like a personalizing or a nastiness of politics. I reckon she just doesn't like actual political or policy debates playing out so intensely.
Interesting. Although if you told me about the nasty politics of the minority government of Gillard, you're thinking about the Peter Slipper affair, the misogynist abuse thrown at Julia Gillard.
You think that's what she's
the witch stuff.
Talking about? But
I think that that's what she's sort of indicating generally. Yeah.
Is that a result of the hung parliament? Yeah, I'm not so sure.
Well, Albo counters. He thinks that he lays the blame at Abbott, right? Like Abbott's opposition and strategy in opposition to be relentlessly negative.
That's right. I think it's just an opposition strategy.
Yeah, right. To sort of play that out there. Whereas Christopher Pines seems to seriously argue that he's like, Tony Abbott was offended by the Gillard minority government and the carbon tax lie and doing too many deals with the Greens. He was just so incensed.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure.
That's why everyone got so nasty.
He was just passionate from the heart.
So, I mean, I'm just interested in your thoughts on this because it's
he truly thought she was a witch bitch. He truly thought she was a Julia. You know what? And that's his right.
And sue him for having an opinion. Sorry. Yeah. You can't say anything anymore.
He was so passionate about misogyny.
Yeah. I mean, it's like this idea of like how nasty politics is. I agree with you. And I think, we could explain I'll point to this golden era in which everybody got along fantastically. And of course, people can't do it. And political and class conflict has been raging for literally centuries.
As it should.
As it should do. I suppose I just wonder whether, and maybe this is a small L liberal fantasy that I'm worried about. But I suppose, is there a perception amongst ordinary people or people's willingness or lack thereof to engage with or trust the political process because of this sense of nastiness that is perhaps amplified somewhat by social media? Like, is that an issue or a barrier anywhere between us as a Greens progressive movement trying to engage with other people in politics?
I'm not sure. Like, I think that people might say that, yes, they're turned off by nastiness in politics, but I think a bigger factor is whether they think politics can make a difference in their lives and whether they have any genuine connection to it. Like, I mean, to be honest, I think you look at some of the more engaging or radicalizing moments in politics, and a lot of the things that do draw people into paying attention are sometimes kind of nastier or more personal. And yeah, what really causes people to disengage is when they're just like, I don't know, they're just saying the same shit, nothing changes.
Yes, and they all agree with each other. I mean, again, the bipartisan critique. You're always fighting. Can't you just get along? Well, no, actually, Annabelle, these people agree on a very large amount of things. There's actually a huge number of things that the Labor Party and the Liberal Party agree on, and the political class agrees on. And a lot of that is to the detriment of servicing ordinary people and making this country a better place. That is completely missing from this conversation. Would you believe it? There's a moment when they're talking about the 2014 budget, and Annabelle Crabb sort of says, "Hey, did you feel weird defending the 2014 budget when it was so bad?" Of course, Tony Abbott's just been replaced, and Turnbull's back in, which Pyne supported, even though he was very close with Tony Abbott. They used to have lunch all the time, but he's more of a Turnbull guy. And his this amazing moment with Pyne just says, "Hey, this is what we decided. So my attitude has always been, get out there and sing your team song. I'm a team man. Sometimes you have to do things that aren't easy to do." And what he means is, at the time, saying that the 2014 budget is really good, even though he's now admitting, the 2 year later, that it was bad and it broke promises and it was terrible. And so he presents this as like an admirable quality, that he's a team player. And when you're in a party like the coalition of Liberals, you might lose the internal argument, but then you've got to go out there and hit the media and defend this budget that was going to basically impose a brutal austerity on the people of Australia and would make people's lives materially worse across the country. But oh well, I'm Team Blue.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like, it's like, yes, do I agree with that though? I think from a Greens perspective, I sort of do think that MPs have to, toe the party line and like practice discipline in terms of like a party message and party unity. But that is on the basis of, or like the premise that decisions are made on a democratic basis. So I think that's different in the LNP or Liberal Party, because they don't make decisions on a democratic basis. Whereas I'm like, I kind of would expect an MP in the Greens who is theoretically making a decision that's based on party policy that's decided by members through a consensus decision-making process, and who then has a conversation in party room, a consensus decision-making process, and hopefully that's also informed by consultation with members and all of that, that then, even if they disagree with the consensus decision at the end of that process, I think they kind of do have to back it in. And if they so stridently disagree, like that's the thing, I think if you really disagree with that outcome, then you should probably question your membership of the party. Like, and if you think that there's a problem with the policy, you should go to state council and try to change it. And if you're finding that you're consistently disagreeing with the positions of the party, then you should leave, because I don't believe in, all these people who, for example, stay in Labor even though they say they disagree with everything.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, if you said, well, Christopher Pyne, if you knew that this budget was bad, then you should resign and say so. But of course, he would never do that. He'd say, for the greater good, I got to stay in there and then be a moderate voice in the party and the government.
Yeah, but that's the thing, because you're in a shit party that makes shit decisions.
Yeah. Sort your life out, mate.
Yeah.
But I guess it's fucking tricky, right? Because, I hear that and then I think of things like Penny Wong being out there defending her party's position on marriage equality. Not just saying, hey, I lost the argument and I support marriage equality. No, saying, no, it's actually trying to think of arguments to defend the fact that the party that she's a part of opposes marriage equality, mainly because the SDA is full of conservative Catholic psychopaths who used their voting power to restrict the party from changing its policy. Right?
But that's
which
where,
the left lost.
I think sorry.
Sorry, and I just say that I think that is a big factor as why people hate politics. They see someone just lying, giving a bald-faced lie for the sake of party discipline in public, when we are told that politics is about the debate of ideas and everyone is allowed to speak freely about what they think is the best idea to address the problem. But of course, no, they're just saying, I'm doing what head office tells me to say.
Yeah, I think I just find it hard to get past the fact that I'm like, the problem for me is that she's in the Labor Party and the Labor Party has this horrifically wrong position that gay marriage shouldn't be legalized, And so I find it hard to get past that to the, okay, but if she then stays in the shit party with the shit positions, what should she do then? And is it right for her to contradict her own party? Because I'm just like, yeah, but I just can't get past, like, why are you in the fucking Labor Party when it's so shit, But I take your point. Like, if you're going to make a bad decision of being in that party, maybe you can make one good decision and say something good. I don't know.
Try and balance the scales, yeah. Regardless, being in the Liberal Party and defending the 2014 budget, both terrible decisions.
Yes, evil and evil.
There's a great moment when Annabelle Crab, Christopher Pine basically dominates the conversation, by the way, basically owns, cuckolds Albo throughout. There's a point where Annabelle is asking Albanese quite a serious question about the Rudd Gillard years and like supporting Rudd and the leadership tension and how difficult it was. And then Pine just interrupts with,
"This Wagyu beef is
that
superb.
they were.
This Wagyu beef is superb." Just talks over Albanese completely. It was
is he running interference or is he just fully like, he just does not give a shit?
Christopher Pine says whatever comes into his thin little head, it just immediately pops out.
Incredible.
There's an interesting reflection on their respective paths within their own parties. Pine reckons that he and Albo get along because we've both taken the hardest route to come up through our respective parties. It means Albo on the left of the New South Wales Labor Party and Pine as a moderate in the SA Liberals.
Little internal underdogs.
I guess so. It's sort of hard to think, and then you think, well, SA Liberals did have Nick Minchin and Cory Bernardi, so there is clearly this like massive conservative rump there that were pretty batshit. I associate SA Liberals now with like, Birmingham and Pine and very soft Liberals. Although Nicole Flint was also from South Australia too, so there are some fucking weirdos in there. And Albanese talks a little bit about the fact that he was the only left-winger in Sussex Street in the 70s and 80s in New South Wales LP. 19, It was working in an office of 20 people, 19 of them were on the right. He was the only one on the left.
What kind of office?
This is at the head office of New South Wales Labor. New South Wales Labor, basically. Right,
damn,
party,
that's pretty brutal.
Once again, not a real job, but yes, he worked there, and he did sort of rise to the top of that party, which is impressive, quote unquote, or at least would have gone through a lot of shit.
It's something, anyway.
It's something. It's not nothing. He was busy out there protesting for Palestine and standing up for Palestinian rights, and then what happened?
Where are we now?
He made his way all the way up to the top of Sussex Street, then on his way to The Hague.
Wow. Our boy from public housing.
Did you see that tweet from Lozo94_, who's great, always got some great takes, I reckon, but just tweeted, "Albo to The Hague, but I grew up in social housing."
Yes, I did see that. Yes.
Good defense. All right, bringing it home. There's this last bit when Annabelle Crabb mentions that she read a profile on the two of them that asked them about the greatest song of all time, to name what they think is the greatest song of all time. Anthony Albanese's choice is "That's Entertainment" by The Jam, a fine song, I suppose. Christopher Pine chooses,
And I chose "Somewhere Over the Rainbow."
"Somewhere Over the Rainbow."
That is so fun. How does he? Is he like? Do you reckon it's queer baiting at this point?
He's the Harry Styles of Australia.
Yeah. Come on.
Maybe he doesn't believe in labels, you know?
Okay.
And Annabelle Crabb's using that. So this is when they were a lot younger, and she sort of said, "What do you think? You know, you would have thought of each other as younger men, I suppose, if you met each other all those years ago when you were doing that sort of profile. And Pine says, I would have loved getting to know Anthony. I've always like to get to know my opponent, find their weaknesses and crush them.
Psycho.
Being a little bit funny, a little bit psycho. Albanese talks about the fact how he didn't meet a Liberal voter until he went to uni. Which is pretty interesting. He was surrounded by a Labor voter and then eventually, I guess, went to Sydney Uni and realised people. Pine admits that he was wearing a Liberal badge when he was 8 years old, for fuck's sake.
Oh, God, he would have been insufferable. He's probably wearing like a full suit, one of those little children.
The Caleb Bond of his day.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But Pine makes it very clear, don't stereotype us, of course. Okay. I'm not. Yes, I'm a Liberal voter. I came from a very comfortable, wealthy background, but I'm not an economic rationalist, because when you're a Catholic and a Liberal, you still believe the government has a role to play to look after the most vulnerable. Oh. See, that's weird because you backed the budget, Christopher, and then your entire political project was about cutting taxes for the rich people and not expanding the social welfare state at all. And in fact, you just believe that rich people should have way more money, and you don't give a shit about the poor at all, as far as I can tell, just based on the things that you've said and done for years and years and years and years.
Well, that's what his actions might say, but aren't you glad that Annabelle Crabb gave us an opportunity to find out, to understand what he was thinking as he was doing those things in direct opposition of his apparent beliefs?
Yeah, it's crazy when you talk to someone about what they think and do. They think that they're doing the right thing. This is an exclusive to Kitchen Cabinet, that when you talk to politicians, they think that they're good and that what they're doing is correct. And that's a really interesting insight that we can use to make our judgments about them.
Yeah.
They finished with a dessert of a banana split with mango and sticky rice and coconut ice cream, which looked quite nice.
Yum. Usually Annabelle has a sort of meaning behind the dessert that she brings, like that she thinks it's going to reflect them somehow. Did she have a take on this?
Why a banana sort of a split? Twist on a banana split. Maybe the split, maybe something about
the split
maybe. She literally says at the end, here's to bipartisanship.
Okay. All right.
You know what? That's crazy. Actually, at no point, now thinking about it, no point in this episode do they talk about what they agree on. Like no one actually, they don't actually identify, okay, bipartisanship over what particular issues.
Did they identify what they disagree on?
No, well, I guess at one point Pine's like, well, we have different ideas about where we want the country to go and how we get there.
Okay.
But blah.
That's very vague.
Very vague indeed. Yes, not talking about some fundamentally
Annabelle Crabb
diametrically
thinks it's really nasty when we have political conversations, so...
Looking back at it, it's like, yes, bipartisanship is good because the yelling and the nastiness in politics is uncomfortable to watch.
Turn the volume down. Let's have dumplings.
Oy, oy, oy.
And that's my jam.
Another installment thereof. All the episodes, all the seasons of Kitchen Cabinet are free to watch on the public broadcaster if you so wish. I'd skip those too, to be honest. We should go to some crazy ones next time. I think there's a Clive Palmer one in there.
I wanted to watch Corey Bernardi.
Corey Bernardi would be good. Let's get into the real freaks. Now, my question to you before we finish is, if there is another season of this, do we want to see the Max Chandler Mather episode? Do we want to see Barbara Pocock?
They'll ask him, won't they?
Yeah. They'll go to his little house that he's renting.
Oh my God!
And he'll have to make it look.
He'll
have to make it look messier. He'll have to punch holes in the wall.
I mean, he's got a very young baby. I can imagine that he probably doesn't need to do anything to make it messier.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But yeah, of course they would love. God, he's such a media darling. I mean, look, I love Max. He's doing great work, but they just love him.
What would he make? He just maybe order,
He likes an ottolenghi recipe. I reckon he'd do something from there.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if he's not in the next season, we should do one. We should make some serious danger content.
Yes, we'll go to Max's.
That'll be some Patreon content. Thanks for supporting that show, you guys. We love you. Send us a message anytime. You can message us via Patreon, of course. And remember, there's a whole back catalogue of bonus content that you can enjoy, including, if you haven't listened to it already, I reckon one of the best things we've ever done was the live segment from our Melbourne show when we talked about Victorian Senator Ralph Babbitt. If you haven't listened to that, true. I reckon that's definitely worth a listen to get you excited for our upcoming live shows and also for your own listening pleasure.
Absolutely. Also, just when this is coming out, we're still selling tickets for our live shows unless they've sold out by now. But you should come and see us in April in Naarm, Melbourne and MEANJIN, Brisbane. Check our website, seriousdangerpod.com, for the links for the tickets. Love you very much.
Bye-bye.
That's my jam.